Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Hutchins Center's Alumni Fellows Reading Series. Today, we are honored and excited that Professor Shadreck Chirikure has returned to share with us his new book, Great Zimbabwe, Reclaiming a Confiscated Past. Professor Chirikure is at the University of Cape Town and holds a British Academy Global Professorship within the School of Archaeology at Oxford. He is a leading archaeologist studying pyrotechnology and Southern Africa. And he will be in discussion with Clapperton Chakanetsa Mavhunga. He is Professor of Science, Technology, and Society at MIT, as well as the author of several important volumes published by MIT Press, including most recently, The Mobile Workshop, The Tsetse Fly and African Knowledge Production, and Transient Workspaces, Technologies of Everyday Innovation in Zimbabwe. He is also the editor of What Do Science, Technology, and Innovation Mean from Africa, also by MIT. Please welcome Professor Mavhunga.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you all and to be in conversation with somebody I regard as a good friend. We went to school together at the University of Zimbabwe. He was in archaeology and I was in history. The only reason why I ended up not being an archaeologist is that our mentors, Professor Bikrai and Professor Pkiti, could not convince me that it was a good thing to dig up dead people. But Shadreck was okay with this. And but his mission was more than just about digging the dead, but also digging the past in order to unite it with the kind of language and cultures of knowing that undergirds our identity as Zimbabweans. The way that I'm sure you will see a lot more about his CV, I just want to say that I am very delighted that, he is here with us to talk about this book, Great Zimbabwe, Reclaiming a Confiscated Past, which has been long in coming. Put a lot of thought into this conversations back and forth regarding what to do with pasts that are written from a perspective of the colonizer, and how we discover ourselves in things that have been reduced to monuments, as if they don't have any meaning in ourselves. And to that extent, then, I would like to invite Professor Chirikure to give us a sense of the book, just 5 minutes by way of introduction, and then we will go into the second question.
Thanks so much, and greetings from across the Atlantic, and so very nice to be connecting with you all. And this is the book in question. I hope you can read things that are upside down. But anyway, the book is an attempt at a thought experiment. What happened was that in most cases, I come from a village which is around about 45 minutes away from Great Zimbabwe, so to the north. But the key thing is that I'd never really thought about, well, this place is nearby, and I studied for a career. But what would it take if I were to write about Great Zimbabwe using the experience that I got growing up? So the village philosophy, the tales, the myth, and so on. And then another thing also happened. When I attended the African Studies Association conference in Chicago, and I ended up going to Duke University to give a talk. So I don't remember whether I mentioned, decolonization by name, but a question that emerged was that, how do you practically decolonize, right? You say you come from very close, very nearby Great Zimbabwe. Can you give us an interpretation that is as close to your village experience as possible? So the result then became the book. And what it is simply doing is that there is so much that we learn if we were to use our local ways of knowing, local ways of thinking. There is also some stuff that we need to unlearn, particularly the indoctrination from the colonial period, right? That you have to think in a particular way and using a particular value system. So those are some of the things that you need to unlearn, as well as learn from the other parts of the world. So the book then is a challenge to those working in the global South and also in the global North, to say that what happens if we are to rethink some of the places such as Great Zimbabwe from a village perspective. The last time I talked about this book, someone in Britain said, oh, well, so maybe we need to decolonize Stonehenge and to learn it from our own perspective, which is something that I thought was interesting. So the concepts that we use, particularly as archaeologists, the concept of time. What does a radiocarbon chronology mean? When we cite these dates, Great Zimbabwe was built between AD 1000 and it flourished around until AD 1700. What does that mean? Can we think of that chronology from an African value system, right? So is there any point in looking at the past as something that is past? In other words, that is gone? Or the past is at that important place? It's a laboratory, something that you have written about yourself, Professor Mavhunga, that is a source of information. So how do we use that knowledge from the past to try and improve lives in the present? So that's perhaps the departure point, to say that let's not just study the past for its own sake, but rather what knowledge can we get? In fact, when we are applying for jobs, they say, what experience do we have, right? But then the past is experience. It's a sum of adaptation, innovation. Why not apply it then to improve lives? But we cannot do that if we remain captive to some of those frameworks that particularly believed in African incapacity and so on. So this is just a challenge to say that, look, if we were to reclaim the past, there is a lot that we can do from that empowerment, and we can also be engaged in conversations with different people across the globe in ways that are meaningful and in ways that are less colonial. So let me end here.
Thanks, Shadreck. But why the book now? Why reclaim this confiscated past now? And reclaim it for whom?
There's also another story to this. That about 4 years ago, and that's my only claim to fame, there is a television production company based in France. So they approached me and said, can we produce a documentary on Great Zimbabwe, right? what they were interested in is some of my papers and others that I have written with others. So we agreed to do the documentary, and which was actually broadcasted in, I think, at least 9 countries in the EU. So that's why I was saying that was the only time when I could sign autographs. You know, if you missed me, then that's it. But on a more serious note, what then happened out of that is I realized that, well, we are in the habit of talking a lot. Talk, but we don't act. We don't do anything. So, and also taking advantage of the movement, particularly associated with decolonizing knowledge and so on. So that then became a very important a moment to say, well, maybe the way in which we were looking at things, we need to change that a little bit, because the past is not just, it does not exist in the past, but it must be used for the benefit of the present. And how can we use the past to inform conversations about development of society, conversations about innovation, conversations about resilience. So this, I think, for me was a timely moment where we needed to demonstrate that a place such as Great Zimbabwe is not just a monument, but it is a result of creativity. It is a result of enterprise. So why not learn from that enterprise to create new enterprises that can, you know, benefit the present? And that is also a marked departure for what one might call a colonial way of just saying, when you go to Great Zimbabwe, is the spectacular stone walls, you know, it's pottery, right? But pottery is knowledge, right? If you look at it from scientific techniques, you will be able to tell the foods that were cooked in there, right? What can those foods tell us about diet? What can they tell us about cropping regimes, right? Can we use that information then to engage with the communities to say, from a dietary point of view, these are some of the things that we can learn from Great Zimbabwe. So that's why then at this moment became perhaps you know, the best time, because everything seemed to have been falling in place, and then the book came out.
So there have been 1,001, you know this, there have been 1,001 accounts of Great Zimbabwe, a very big chunk of which is written by people who don't come from Zimbabwe or Africa. The question then becomes, so it's not clear to me who we write for. Because our accounts are academic. Our accounts are published by MIT Press. I'm not immune to this. Yours is published by Springer, is this?
Routledge.
Routledge. And it's not cheap. So yes. Can you help me reflect on who did you write this book for?
So you touched on a number of very interesting things, right? So for half the time as academics, maybe, but yeah, when I wrote this book, I was already full professor. So I was not doing it to get promotion or to get tenure, because I already had tenure. But half the time, that is what we do. So you then have to write it and publish it with a reputable publisher, and it has to also conform to certain standards, certain frameworks, and so on. And if it also goes with Routledge, then it comes with a price tag of $150 US, right? The goal of writing this book was to say, okay, if I can write it from my own village experience using some of those stories, that my grandmother used to tell me and translate them into archaeological concepts. Maybe the people in my village can also read. But then, because of the poverty that is there, not many people can afford to buy the book even on Amazon, right? Because it's so expensive. So although it was written, you know, for the village, it was written for people that normally would not engage with sophisticated academic theories and so on. Those people are also disempowered through pricing. So therein lies the contradiction, that the people that you write for or that you think you are writing for, they have no access to the material. So what do you do? That's yes, of course, I bought about 60 copies and distributed them, but that is not enough in terms of that. So coming to your question, who did I write this book for? For everyone, for myself, and also for others. So the key thing is, can we be engaged in a conversation, right? If you are from China, if you are from Australia, if you are from Europe, if you are from America, can we be engaged in a conversation about you know, writing, rewriting, rethinking places such as Great Zimbabwe from locally centered perspectives, and then compare the outcomes? I mentioned earlier that one of the thoughts was that you know, maybe there's need to decolonize Stonehenge. So that's an interesting conversation. I would like to see how that could play out.
So if I were a practitioner and I wanted to use this book as something that would be useful in a project, say, about rural development in Africa, take me through what kinds of aspects in this book might be most helpful towards that.
So chapter 7 is on craft science and engineering. And also chapter 8 is on interconnections, exotics, fame, and so on. So one of the most important things is that if you are talking about the development of Africa, the first thing to think about from an intellectual or from a philosophical point of view is that, as you know, it was argued that Africa had no initiative. The Africans didn't do it. They could not do it, right? And perhaps they will not do it. So the key question then becomes, in terms of the models that we then use to say accounting for the development of Great Zimbabwe itself, most of the colonial narratives that still are refractory in the post-colony, they still talk about Great Zimbabwe's emergence as being a result of inputs from the Indian Ocean. So in 1906 or in 1896, rather, Theodore Bent said that these Africans could not have built Great Zimbabwe, right? In 2022, we are saying, well, maybe the Africans built Great Zimbabwe, but they needed the Indian Ocean for them to do it. The net result is that the Africans still have not done it. It's still the same influence. So one of the things that the book is doing then is saying, no, that does not work, right? We have to look for internal dynamics, the internal contributions of the internal economy. So translated or taken to another level, it also critiques the idea that for Africa to develop, for rural Zimbabwe to develop, for rural Senegal to develop, there is need for aid from France. You see, for these communities to develop, you need international aid. No, you don't need that. So what the book is, the message that the book is saying is, no, no, no. What you need is to go into these places such as Great Zimbabwe, excavate them, obtain knowledge on crafting, obtain knowledge on engineering, obtain knowledge on architecture, and then use that to try and come up with solutions to local problems. So there's the issue of diet, for example. We know that Great Zimbabwe was based on the agriculture at Great Zimbabwe was based on growing grains such as millets, finger millet, and the other types of millets. And we also know that those millets, in terms of the dietary contribution, they are much better than maize, which was promoted by colonial policies, colonial agricultural policies. So what we can also, for these communities to develop, then there is need to emphasize more in terms of these indigenous grains and so on, with the health benefits. They are also good economically, and there are so many opportunities. So just to wrap up then, the first thing that the book does is to change the mindset, to say that no, yes, it's good to learn from others. That's great. But also we need to learn from ourselves, and we need to learn from the experiences, what worked during Great Zimbabwe's time, and we also need to contextualize it for our own purposes. And that we also need to look into some of the information, some of the knowledge on diets, on crops, responses to climate change, and think about it within the changed circumstances of the present. That for me is much better than going for a template in France or Germany or somewhere. You have to keep it local, although you can still learn from others. The main problem being that we tend to borrow from others and then forget that we also have brains and we also have hands, and we can also make contributions. So if we combine the African input with inputs from elsewhere, that is much more empowering than to totally dismiss the African experience as something that does not work. And we know that it built a great Zimbabwe, and it also developed other nations and other continents.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised this, because one of the things that turned me off back in my years at the University of Zimbabwe from archaeology was a sense that anytime you saw ruins or places formerly lived, that was already archaeology. And archaeology was the preserve of only two institutions. The one institution was the archaeology department, where you cut your teeth. The second was the National Museums and Monuments. It was the same with history as it was taught. The archive was the place where, and I'm asking this so that we can reflect on these two meanings from Great Zimbabwe. So you could, spiritually, I'm at Great Zimbabwe as we speak. So you had archives, and that was the National Archives of Zimbabwe, mostly government sources and other paraphernalia that was collected from private collections. And then the history department itself. And these places were well demarcated. We knew which professor worked with this stuff, which one was. It was more like a partition of Africa, which I talk about in The Colony is in Us, The Colony is Us, in that paper. And my question then is, because clearly this is a kind of colonial partition of the academies that existed at the University of Zimbabwe at the time, which turned some of us off from archaeology. How much of this has changed? That's the first question. The institutionalization and compartmentalization of the archaeology of these sites, which are multifocal, is archaeological sites to be studied only by students and their professors, on the one hand, and the archive is a place where only written materials are resident. And so what's the state of play? Is anything changed? If not, where do you see the greatest promise in terms of decolonizing that landscape?
So the key question is, yes, there's the coloniality, which you spoke about, but there's also the issue of careerism, right? That we want to make a successful career. So because the after archaeological excavations were stopped at Great Zimbabwe for 40 years, because I was the person that then did the very first excavations at Great Zimbabwe after 40 years, then I should fence it off and chase you, all of you guys, right? and make it only accessible to just myself and my students, because they write papers for me, isn't it? So then see it as a, so there's that element of careerism, which sometimes it overlaps with the coloniality. And then there's also the issue of imposing disciplinary boundaries. So archaeologists go to Great Zimbabwe, or archaeologists go to the museum, historians go to the archive, right? And then we don't really build synergies or bridges to actually say, no, Great Zimbabwe is an archive, a very different type of archive that you can visit. You can look into the you can excavate, and the way in which the sediments are layered. It's an archive which can tell you important information. And historians also, and others, anthropologists, they also have a place to contribute, right? Just as archaeology also relies on museums. So you excavate stuff from Great Zimbabwe, you deposit it into the Museum of Human Sciences, right? It is also boxed. But as you know, if you are an archaeologist, sometimes the thrill of discovery is much more exciting than going into a museum and then get exposed to dust and so on. So not many people look at those things anyway. So those are archives that are also not being used. But then there's also another problem, which is that sometimes you also had people that excavated at Great Zimbabwe in the 1970s and so on. The material which they excavated, they kept it at home. It's in their garages. It's in their own cabinets. And they were professors. You know, during the colony, they had the power. So you have those types of archives. And if you want that material, you have to write something that conforms to my own logic. We can have arguments about the need to repatriate that material or not. But there is coloniality, there is careerism, and there's also people operating in silos. So the promise there is in terms of developing joined up thinking, right? Society does not work in terms of the divisions, of the compartmentalizations that we impose. That I'm an engineer, I am a finance expert, I'm an archaeologist. No, everything is so interlinked and is so interwoven, you know, with everything. That's the joined up thinking that we need to develop. So when we go to Great Zimbabwe next, then there would be need to have different specializations, as well as you know, even non-specialists in courts. They also have a place a contribution to make. But then the question then becomes, if you consider yourself a serious professor, how many people will take you seriously? I know at our level, in terms of our career, well, because you have tenure, you have everything. It's a question that does not that does not apply. But to some, it's something that matters. So that then forces you to conform, even if you find things are pretty uncomfortable. So there's great promise if people can work together and also can acknowledge some of the limitations imposed by the colony, and also acknowledge the opportunities that were created by the colony. Imagine they had done everything that we are talking about. What would we be doing?
So one of the things that I find striking as a scholar and an intellectual, as distinct from being an academic, as an intellectual, is that to the degree that we belong, we are a creature of the academy. Regardless of the wonderful talk we may have around decolonizing of whatever sort, it remains true that we still take knowledge from sites like this into the academy. We very rarely, and when we produce knowledge, we are mostly producing it with our colleagues, for our colleagues to read. We do not make a move that I think you are beginning to make in this book. In the voices of Chief Charumbira, Chief Mugabe, and other chiefs, the move you are making is to reconcile this site with the everyday. And to remove it from the noise and din of international connectivity, which quite frankly often means nothing to ordinary people, and returning it to be in conversation and active in people's everyday lives. That move with language, I think, to me, speaks to a larger question regarding who we write for. But it also poses another question of tangible benefit beyond inclusion. Talk to me about any reflections you might have on how we might advance towards that restitution, what Walter Mueller called restituting destituted knowledges. Because it's not simply about how nicely we write and how we take this language into the conversation, but it's also about restitution with all that it entails. How might we be able to go about it? Any reflections?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing is to perhaps identify the many points of disconnect, right? So the first being that so when you are born, maybe 5, 6, or 7, then you start school, right? And that school, primary school, secondary school, you go to university. That educational journey does not speak to the other experience around you. It's about passing the exam, right? It's about becoming the top student in class, right? It's really about, this knowledge that you have learned. Have you used it to help look after the cows? Have you used it to ensure that the fields are more productive in terms of the yield and so on? No, it's Pythagoras. Yes, a square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the other two sides squared. That's fine. You memorize that. How do you apply that to real life? So there is need to realize that there is so much in terms of untapped knowledge, tried and tested knowledge, which people use for the everyday. There is everyday, everyday innovation. People solve problems, they encounter challenges, they solve those problems. So, and that knowledge, we marginalize it, right? Either it's non-scientific, it's non-scholarly, or it hasn't been approved by MIT, so we can't really take that stuff seriously, right? So we need to acknowledge that no, there are also these solutions. So the dualism, non-scientific versus scientific, traditional knowledge versus modern knowledge, and so on. If we can erase that dualism and realize that no, knowledge is knowledge, what is perhaps important is to solve problems, then if we were to do that, then perhaps that can also change the manner in which we approach knowledge production. That's when we can realize that no, actually Chief Mugabe has been repairing dry stone walls, right? So he actually understands quite a lot about how to conserve the stone walls at Great Zimbabwe to sustain the place using tried and tested knowledge. So there are no principles of subsidence that modern engineering talks about. There are no concepts like, can we calculate the tensile strength or the compressive forces and all that engineering modeling, or there's nothing like that. But the knowledge works, right? And the walls are standing. That's why they've been standing for at least 1,000 years, right? This is knowledge that works. The key thing then is we just need to know that it is available for us to use, and that is one way in which we can. So let's use that knowledge. It's there for us to use it. Yes, we were told that it does not work, but we know that it works. So I don't see what would stop us from making more use of that knowledge, and also benefit from the other advantage that at least we have access to the other knowledge systems. So if we combine all of that, then that can make sure that we have a place for Chief Mugabe, we have a place for the ordinary man or woman in the village, in the street, and as well as we can also speak the language of our fellow professors. But there's also need to take the university to the village, right? Take it from the ivory tower to the language every day to the street, so that, because that's knowledge, that's what knowledge should be able to do. It should not just be reserved for our complex, algorithms and so on. What's the point?
What's the point indeed? And on that note, I would like to turn it back to Krishna.
Thank you. The audience members are welcome to put their name in the chat if they would like to ask some questions or offer some comments. And as people gather their thoughts, I wouldn't mind asking a simple question. Perhaps this will help break the ice. Professor Chirikure, why is confiscated in quotations in your title? What do you wish to convey by that?
Each time I talk about this book, I get asked that question, and I will also give exactly the same answer. So the reason why confiscated is in quotes is not that I am doubting that the past was confiscated. It was confiscated, but it's just a marketing thing. That when you see the quotation confiscated in quotation marks, then you would think like, what is he talking about? Is he sure of what he's talking about? And so on, and hopefully get people interested. So that's the only reason why it's in quotation marks. But yes, the past had been or has been confiscated, and even during my early career, I also confiscated that past because I was taking it from the village, going, talking with fellow professors, forgetting that no, there was need to have a conversation with everyone, create a past that is accessible and that is also inclusive. So nothing sinister, I promise.
Thank you. I didn't think otherwise. We have a question from Eric Garvan. I think you may be muted.
Go unmute. Okay, great. First of all, this is incredible. Thank you so much. Is it true that the city is built on non-Euclidean geometry? It's a question that I have, that there are no right angles in the city. The other question is, are there any other locations that are built using this type of geometric structure? And what are the other key, unique geometric philosophies that exist in the city? And are there any trade arrangements between the ancient city and the rest of the world that have been documented and could possibly be exploited or useful in today's world?
Okay, thanks. And that's quite interesting because Professor Mavhunga has been writing about mathematics in Great Zimbabwe, so he can also add a bit to that. But yes, Great Zimbabwe was well networked with different parts of the world. So there is evidence of Chinese material culture, glass beads from India, and some material from Indonesia. And even within Africa itself, there is also evidence of musical gongs, some which could have been produced 2,000 kilometers away in the current day Democratic Republic of Congo. There is also copper, which was produced in the Central African copper belt, which we have documented through a lead isotope analysis. So the similarities in terms of the isotopic composition suggests that some of the copper that was used at Great Zimbabwe was sourced from current day Central Africa. So it was a local hub, it was a regional hub, it was an international hub. So that's very easy to. In terms of the construction techniques and the engineering that went into it, it is a very interesting architectural ensemble. Yes, there are no right angles, and in some cases, the construction technique, particularly on the hill, was taking advantage of the topography, such that if there are rock surfaces, then that was used in terms of the foundation to establish the foundation, and sometimes the walls were also built taking advantage of those natural features. The other thing is that if we take a structure such as the Great Enclosure, I saw Matt pasted something in the chat. So with the Great Enclosure, the interesting thing is that it was built with no foundation, so to speak, right? So nowadays, when you want to build a building, what you would do is you excavate first, right? Whether it's a certain number of feet, and then you do your footing, right? Either you put your concrete and so on. There is nothing like that. So the foundation is probably around 40 centimeters into the ground, and that's probably because of the cumulative weight over the years. However, to take advantage of subsidence, what the engineers at Great Zimbabwe did was that they constructed the walls such that they've got a very wide base, and then they taper as they go to the top. So the base in some cases is 4 meters wide, but then at the summit, the top of the walls is around 2 meters, right? So that then took advantage of, or took care of the lack of the foundation, and then in terms of the construction techniques, you have an outer face and then an outer face. Then in the middle, you have a core of interlocking blocks. So blocks that are closely packed, but at different angles to lock them. So that's what then gives the structure the stability which it has over time. And just to end off here, and I hope Professor Mavhunga has something to say on the mathematics. There are more than 500 of places such as Great Zimbabwe. So this is a way of building which people were involved with for quite a long time. And 3 of those places, Great Zimbabwe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Mapungubwe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Kami is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So they are built in the same tradition, using the same architectural and construction principles. Professor Mavhunga, do you have anything on the mathematics, engineering?
Yeah, just to follow up on why is it that the international, overseas, or transoceanic gets emphasized a lot. It's in view of the externalization of the story of Great Zimbabwe. Must have been built by Phoenicians, must have been built by so and so, anyone other than Black people. And so it was convenient to drum up that story at the exclusion of intra-Africa connections. And if there's one thing that African archaeologists have now been focusing on more so, is how to relate Africa, Trans-Africa, as a continent, and not simply as this ragtag, isolated spaces. It's politically, it makes sense in order to say that Africa was not simply a place where everybody was at war with each other. There were moments of peace, happiness, exchange, festivals, delegations, etc., etc. And that seems to be coming out with the gongs that are found. One thing is found here, tomorrow it's next. The optic has shifted with the work of Chirikure. The optic has shifted from simply looking for curious stuff to substantiate a Western-centric narrative to one of self-rediscovery, on course towards self-rehumanization and self-intellectualization, which brings you to the mathematical dimension of this. I have asked myself, what mathematics built Great Zimbabwe? What physics built Great Zimbabwe? What chemistry built Great Zimbabwe? It's important because now we are superimposing all these mathematical terms we didn't have absent the colonial moment. And we are explaining Great Zimbabwe according to centimeters, meters, inches, etc., etc. The ancestors who built this did not use that, but they measured. This is a work of geometry. When you read Senghor, Leopold Senghor, he talks about geometry. When you go to Dakar, Senegal, you will see that what he was trying to do was to amplify the African geometrical. And it's not simply happenstance. It has logics that you find in Yoruba mathematics, in Zimbabwe mathematics, that you find all over. the challenge we have now is not simply to compare and relate this to Western-centric or Mid-Eastern, broadly defined, but to actually see these cultures as, things that are tools Africans could use for their own self-emancipation. Otherwise, the risk is that we assume that Africa knew mathematics when colonialism happened. It actually, Pythagoras' theorem and these other theorems, when you look at the pyramids of Egypt, it is suggestive that these geometries were already there. When you look at the bathhouses of Carthage, they look very, very similar to Rome. One engineering a colleague of mine, Wole Soboyejo at WPI, reminded me this, and he showed me these amazing images. The implications are that we can come up with another mathematical, not an alternative, but another mathematical that addresses our best and showcases our talents as Africans, and not simply copycats. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say on mathematics.
Thank you. Professor Chirikure, there are two questions from the audience. One is, what do you think the cone-like structure on the Great Hill was used for? What was its function? And secondly, you indicated that studying the past will help facilitate overcoming some of the socioeconomic obstacles that contemporary Zimbabwe faces. What do you mean specifically?
What was the first question? I got the second one, but not the first one.
Yes, there's a cone-like structure on top of the Great Hill in the Big Hill in Great Zimbabwe. What do you think was the function of that structure?
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. So the conical structure is known as the Conical Tower, and that's in the Great Enclosure. And of course, there are smaller little towers that decorate the curtain wall of the Western Enclosure on the hill. So the bigger conical tower, which is a couple of meters high and 6 meters wide, that's also a very impressive engineering structure. The meaning is quite a little bit on the speculative side. Some say it represents a granary, so representing the fertility of the nation. Others say, well, maybe it was a phallic symbol, so talking about the reproductive symbolism, standing for the male organ or something like that. Others also think that it might have symbolized the horns of a bull. But the key question is that it does not seem to have any utilitarian value. It seems to be decorative. It seems to be symbolic. And these days, it also appears on many, like in terms of the government and so on. It's also associated with success, with the resilience. So I would also think that it is perhaps associated with success, particularly in terms of agriculture and societal renewal. But I don't think I buy much into the theory that it was a phallic symbol. No, but I think in terms of the reproductive. So what do I mean by the fact that studying the past will help to address some of the contemporary challenges? then a follow-on question then becomes, what are those contemporary challenges? Right? The first, there are many challenges depending on where you are looking at. The first is that there can be a challenge in terms of governance, depending on how you look at it, and also governance of the resources, governance of the commons, right? Then there's also the issue related to the food production. So, for example, at the moment, food security is a major challenge. Some of the soils that you have in different parts of Zimbabwe, they are quite acidic. They are not really very fertile. In fact, people were moved off fertile land during colonialism, and they now find themselves in areas that are unproductive. And also maize is an import from the Americas. It was brought by the Portuguese. It's not native, right? So the people who were living at Great Zimbabwe, they made it their home for almost 1,000 years, right? And the continuous occupation. What sort of crops were they growing, right? What sort of cattle were they keeping? So the genetics of the cattle, what was the cattle breeds like? Are they the same as the breeds are today? And you can also, from a genetic engineering point of view, you can actually see some of the genetic traits, particularly in terms of resistance to diseases, drought tolerance, and those are factors that you can also use to improve your health today. The same applies to crops. The genetics of some of those crops, you can also use that to, which is what genetic engineering is all about. And also just the understanding that the crops such as maize, they are highly nutritious. There are these diseases such as diabetes and so on. With some of these traditional or ancient diets, they go a long way in terms of helping with maintaining a healthy lifestyle. So all that information can be used with the right level of awareness to ensure that what we learn from Great Zimbabwe is not just, well, it has a spectacular conical tower. Wow, the walls are imposing. Wow, they are great. To something like, no, there's actually agricultural knowledge that we can learn. There's also economic diplomacy that we can learn. For example, you have the kinds of Chinese objects that you find at Great Zimbabwe. They have survived for 800 years, right? Nowadays, we complain that, oh, the Chinese objects, goods, they don't last. Why is it that Great Zimbabwe was able to negotiate for stuff that lasts, for a millennium? Yeah. That's a lesson in diplomacy, but I didn't say that.
Yeah, if I may add, we need not enslave ourselves to past meanings of things, especially if that past is confiscated, by which I mean this was an abducted past, which was Europeanized, made to speak the logics of the colonizer without our consent. The categories that were imposed, fashioned and imposed, need not necessarily lock us into, with talons. We have freed ourselves from that. The question we have is, what questions do we ask the past? If you look at the Conical Tower, if I wanted, I could say, okay, let's assume my ancestors, design this for something else. What do I want to design out of that? What does it inspire me to design? In other words, I see sites like this as inspirational, design inspirations. design inspirations towards new modes of design, ways of thinking. If I decide that, well, maybe this was a good granary, it makes sense to me. I could say, okay, how about constructing granaries this way? Very tall pillars, hollow inside, say. And I want to make sure that this is, you know, a strong structure. What kind of inspirations do I take from that side? The same goes for how people could break such stone and construct a very tall building without cranes. Today we have cranes, the joke used to fly around that our ancestors built Great Zimbabwe without cranes. And it looks like they were able to build these tall buildings, and we can't even build one. We don't even have one crane. That was about 4 or 5 years ago. That's what Abiola Irele was saying, that it is of no use now to be told or to, you know, perspire trying to say that our ancestors built all these great sites, the pyramids of Egypt, Great Zimbabwe, Kilwa Kasalwan, all these places, when our roads are, bleeding sewage, when sewage piles up, when we don't have bridges or roads. We have to activate this knowledge to re-equip history as a tooth comb in search of the right kind of lessons. The same for archaeology. Part of what I take from this book is that this is a tooth comb where we excavate not to show off, but to recover useful tools for imagining the future and designing it differently. When we talk about sustainable design now, as if it's a cool language, we invented it, unaware that the system of synthetics and other 20th century technologies saddled us with a very toxic, very polluting environmental motif and technological motif. Whereas when you look at these sites, you are not going to find the wooden elements because our ancestors used to build in wood. Perishable, yes, and that's why that's then pinned on us that we didn't have a technology. Because we built in organic materials and stone that was available as a mineral. So it's a place of reflection. The past is not a place of residence. It's a place of reflection on course to building new futures, verdant futures at that.
Thank you. I think we're running out of time. I would like to thank you both for an enthralling conversation, and to Professor Shadreck Chirikure, please thank you very much for a profoundly important work. And I think we should all go get the book immediately. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all for coming.